There is a unique elegance to the concept of snipers, a well-trained marksman meticulously calculating their shot and waiting patiently for the perfect moment to take it. Such an image has become a frequent staple of war-related media over the last few decades, especially due to the weapons they use. The rifles in the hands of these elite soldiers are equally as elegant, the simple yet sophisticated bolt action being the often depicted instrument for the methodical marksman to discreetly deliver death. But of course, the Americans had to come along and throw all of that out of the window. The Barrett M82 is probably the most American rifle to emerge in the last 50 years, and accompanying it is a story certainly so American it would make John Moses Browning blush. Designed by a single man with a dream, the Barrett M82 has fast become a staple of global military operations since Desert Storm, with a wide array of applications far beyond many other precision rifles employed in military use. From picking off high-value personnel to disabling entire mechanized divisions, the high-caliber sniper rifle has left an impressive array of destruction in its wake, gaining both fame and infamy along the way. So how did the concept for anti-materiel rifles evolve? What prompted the development of the 50 caliber icon? And how has the devastating Barret fared on its military deployments? The tale of the Barrett M82 begins at two very different times in two very different places, and these two paths take a while to converge, but let's start at the beginning. France, 1916. German soldiers in their marginally better trenches lie in wait for the next British offensive across the crater-filled toxic graveyard known as No Man's Land. Surprisingly, instead of the battle cry of tea-drinking island dwellers, the sound of shitty 1910s internal combustion engines filled the air as the goofiest-looking metal shipboxes ever seen crept over the horizon. Historians, mainly British and German ones, disagree over the feelings of the German soldiers at this point, but regardless, after realizing the tanks as they would become known weren't there to make friends, the Germans began shooting at them, and then watched as their bullets failed to do anything. This was problematic, even more so when the tanks began shooting back, and thus began the still ongoing war between armored vehicles and anti-armor weapons. It was quickly realized by pretty much everyone that tanks are very slow and very stupid, so a number of inventive means were implemented to deal with early tanks, from field cannons to squads of soldiers tossing a shit ton of grenades at them, or just waiting for the tank to get stuck and calling an artillery shot on it. Towards the end of the war though, someone on the German side decided to shrink the tank-busting methodology down into a single rifle, resulting in the Tankgewehr M1918, a beast of a rifle chambered in the 13.2 by 92mm R cartridge, which, in lieu of any convoluted explanation of bullet naming conventions, is a big fucking round. Although capable of penetrating through British tank armor, the German anti-tank rifle was not without fault, the lack of any real recoil mitigation features leaving a skilled operator bruised and breathless after a few shots, and a novice with a broken shoulder after just one. Nonetheless, the Tankgewehr was a literal mule kick of a start, and these anti-tank rifles would become much more refined by the sequel to the supposed war to end all wars. While much of the world was busy experimenting with dictatorships and seeing who could speedrun crashing their economy the fastest, the war between armor and anti-tank weapons continued. Tank armor increased in both thickness and the complexity of its composition in the interwar years, while the anti-tank rifle began to fall out of favor with many militaries, as explosive high-velocity anti-tank rounds launched from artillery largely replaced them due to their overall greater effectiveness. Despite this, with everyone starting to mechanize every part of their military possible, the anti-tank rifle persisted due to its convenience, evolving into a more general anti-materiel role that only required a single user rather than a large gun crew and its accompanying logistics. By the time the Germans and Soviets invaded Poland in possibly the strangest political collaboration of the 20th century, the British Boys 55 and Polish WZ-35 anti-tank rifles were in service as more convenient means to put holes in armored cars, trucks, self-propelled guns, grounded aircraft, and tanks. Well, that was until around 1943, by which time the Soviets had entered the game with their PTRD-41, but this was also where two more significant developments had occurred. Further improvements to tank armor, and the wide adoption of recoilless rifles such as the Panzerfaust and Bazooka, which provided far better options to destroy that armor. This wasn't just problematic, this was a death blow. Quickly, anti-tank rifles fell to the wayside, the Soviets continuing to use their ones as anti-personnel rifles, while pretty much everyone else just sorta stopped using them. By the time the Cold War rolled around, precision rifles became exclusively anti-personnel weapons, with snipers chambered in the likes of 338 Lapua or 7.62 NATO. However, one interesting deviation occurred mostly under the radar with the Americans. You see, the US still heavily utilized the timeless 50 cal M2 Browning machine gun, and in his infinite wisdom, Browning had made the weapon capable of single-shot firing. So, in Korea and Vietnam, soldiers began strapping scopes to their M2s and picking off commies, but more importantly, their stuff. This configuration allowed for cheap destruction of vehicles, supplies, and other large military equipment that would usually require the use of more expensive means to deal with, along with the likes of John Hathcock managing to score kills on soldiers 2,500 yards away. Despite small successes, the Browning sniper was not widespread, and many at the time felt that a shoulder rifle chambered in 50 BMG would be too powerful to be practical, so the military never really pursued it, until one man from Tennessee did some boat photography. Ronnie Barrett is an interesting fella to say the least. Before becoming a world-renowned firearms designer and NRA board member, Barrett was a budding young photographer with a strong interest in weapons. Born in 1954 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Barrett began shooting at a young age, starting with BB guns and .22 caliber rifles, then purchasing a handgun chambered in God's caliber the moment he was able to, a handgun he's supposedly remained faithful to for nearly half a century. This interest in shooting would bring him to the competitive scene, where he noticed a 50 caliber shaped gap in the commercial rifles market, quickly becoming determined to build his own. At this time, 28-year-old Barrett was a commercial photographer and hardly in any position to build such a weapon, until one fateful day in December 1982. Ronnie was hired to do photography for Ramo Incorporated in Nashville, who among other things produced M2 Brownings, and after taking pictures of M2-equipped gunboats, he bluntly asked one of the representatives if they'd be interested in manufacturing his design for a 50 caliber rifle, to which they oddly said yes. With a verbal agreement, some spare time, and a dream, Barrett spent a few months sketching a design for a semi-automatic 50 cal rifle, and then another few months after work building it in an old garage with two more experienced machinists, Bob Mitchell and Harry Watson, resulting in a decent rifle that fired somewhat successfully. Undeterred, he learnt from the shortcomings of the original and produced an improved version he would bestow the name M82 Light 50, which he then took back to the Ramo guys, who now decided they wanted nothing to do with it. In true American fashion, he started selling rifles by just carrying the 75-inch long weapon around at gun shows and showing it to anyone that was interested, eventually attracting a few investors, obtaining some financial backing, and then making the first batch of 30 production rifles in the same old garage. As you might expect, the rifle was not a financial success at the start. Manufacturing the rifles was enough of a task in and of itself, but it would take a lot of financial trial and error before the M82 turned a profit. Then, after some steady growth and a few variants we'll get to later, the military came knocking. Before we get to the history of the M82's military use, we need to establish the benefits of this then unknown rifle that drew in these deep-pocketed customers. Just know this is a gross oversimplification, but I'll do my best to cover the important bits. For one, the 50 BMG chambering of the M82 opened up several new possibilities for the military. Compared to, say, the 7.62 NATO round, a Barrett-fired 50 BMG has much greater velocity, less bullet drop, and hits targets with almost 6 times the power at 1,000 yards, giving it a much greater effective range as a result. Even at ranges of beyond 1,000 meters, a Barrett-fired 50 BMG can easily and accurately pierce all manner of cover, obstacles, vehicles, and equipment, and if you're unlucky enough to be directly hit by one, turn a person into a pink mist. It's important to note though that the M82 is inherently an anti-materiel rifle, but is a highly capable anti-personnel weapon, especially at ranges where traditional service sniper rifles cannot be effective, something that would prove to be a key consideration as the US turned its attention to the vast deserts of the Middle East. This anti-personnel role has a psychological component to it as well, with the word disintegrated often being used to describe those on the wrong end of the Barrett. And like if you saw the dude next to you reduced to a puddle, you'd probably stay in whatever cover you had or just surrender right there. Add to all that the well-engineered semi-automatic operation of the M82, and you have a powerful weapon capable of dealing incredible destruction at extreme ranges that can also quickly follow up with even more damage. However, the M82 is not perfect. For one, even with a number of recoil compensation mechanisms, the M82 still kicks hard, to the point that even slightly handling the weapon incorrectly will result in bodily harm. The M82 is also remarkably loud, and it's important to stay safe from both the loud sound of the rifle firing, but also the massive muzzle blast. This in turn makes the weapon much more visible after firing, especially in dry or dusty environments, though this is often negated by the ranges the rifle is used at. That's all to say though that the arrival of the M82 offered an interesting new role for precision marksmen, and one the world's militaries were keen to experiment with. What had by this time become a somewhat successful sort of underground high-caliber sporting rifle quickly gained the attention of various militaries. Even before this though, Barret had introduced an improved Light 50 variant, the M82A1 in 1986, which, among other improvements, added the now iconic arrowhead muzzle brake to the rifle. Ronnie would be invited to display his M82A1 at a military showcase in Washington, D.C., exposing a number of Western military officials to the new so-called Anti-Materiel rifle, and soon, calls started coming in. As it turned out, the Swedes would beat everyone to the punch, approaching the burgeoning Barret firearms manufacturing with an order for 100 rifles in 1989. However, as part of a move that totally wouldn't come back to bite them in the ass, the CIA had supposedly covertly purchased an unspecified number of the M82 and sent them to the Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan before this. The first above-board sale to the US military went to the Air Force, though the Army and Marines quickly followed suit, with small numbers of the Light 50 supposedly shipped off for the invasion of Panama. In their, completely justified quest to capture Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, the M82 would be combat tested by the Marines, disabling part of the Panamanian air power by wrecking engines, cockpits, and flight services of aircraft on the ground with the 50 caliber rifle. Impressed by the new weapon's capabilities, both the Marines and Army purchased a couple hundred rifles for the next time George H.W. Bush wanted to donate some democracy. Thankfully, a new conflict was brewing in everyone's favorite geopolitical catastrophe, the Middle East, as tensions between Iraq and its neighbors came to a breaking point. When Saddam Hussein stormed into Kuwait on August 2, 1990, Barret was hard at work with his handful of employees building the M82 rifles the Army and Marines had ordered, finishing them up by that December and quickly shipping them off for use in Operation Desert Storm. By now, the Marines had officially adopted the rifle, while the Army still remained somewhat skeptical, but no one could deny how impactful the M82 would become in the deserts of Kuwait. On the wide Kuwaiti plains, the 50 cal sniper proved exceptional, the extreme ranges rendering the standard Remington 700 derived American snipers next to useless, while the Barret was nailing targets with ease. Every piece of equipment the Iraqis had, from trucks to supplies and even radar dishes, became targets in the crosshairs of M82s during Desert Storm, even at one point allowing US Marines to wipe out an entire Iraqi mechanized brigade from 1,500 meters away. By the time the dust settled, the longest sniper kill of the conflict had been claimed by a Barret M82A1, and there were few doubts about its combat effectiveness. The US Army, however, was still unconvinced of the Barret, but they had discovered a similar need for a 50 caliber precision rifle as the Marines, and in 1996 began the Caliber 50 Sniper Rifle, or CFSR, competition with a unique twist. The Army wanted a bolt-action. This wasn't problematic for Barret. He'd already produced a bolt-action variant of the M82, the M90, and then the improved M95, the latter he would submit to the Army. As is common with these sorts of things though, by the new millennium the Army had changed its mind, deciding that actually they wanted a semi-automatic sniper, with the snake eating its own ass, and the Army adopting the M82A1M, a new variant Barret had produced by now, as the M107 long-range sniper rifle, or LRSR, in 2003. Over the next 2 decades, the Light 50 would continue to proliferate throughout the world, attracting the militaries of some 60 nations, along with some less scrupulous characters. But regardless of who was buying them, Barret's customers were spoiled for choice. In the over 40 years Barret Firearms Manufacturing has been producing weapons, the original M82 has been through a number of design changes, the first being the aforementioned 1986 M82A1. This improvement to the original added the instantly recognizable muzzle brake as well as a more refined short recoil operation, and would go on to be the principal source of growth in the company's early years. The next year, in 1987, Barret introduced the M82A1, this being a slightly shorter bullpup variant of the M82 which featured an interesting foregrip, but this wouldn't see much success and was discontinued shortly thereafter. The next to emerge was the M90, the first bolt-action variant developed by Barret, featuring a shorter 5-round magazine and, oddly enough, a similar bullpup configuration to the M82A2, as another means to reduce recoil. This version wouldn't last long in production either, remaining until 1995 when the M95 was introduced, moving the grip and trigger forward to make the rifle easier to load, along with adding a chrome-plated chamber and redesigned bolt handle. Into the late 90s, the M82 became the basis for the XM109 OSW, a rifle firing 25mm high-explosive shells using the lower receiver of the M82, as a potential replacement for the cancelled XM307 ACSW. As the new millennium dawned, the M82A1M would emerge, which included a new rear monopod, an extended Picatinny rail, backup iron sights, and a removable carrying handle. This being the variant adopted by the Army as the M107 LRSR and the Marines as the M82A3 SASR. The M107 would receive a variant of its own in 2005, with the M107CQ, a version of the rifle designed for use in enclosed spaces and vehicles, dropping 9 inches and 5 pounds from the M107. Barret would begin development on a new bullpup variant known as the XM500 in 2006, being a more compact, semi-automatic bullpup design, but not much has really come out in the way of progress. The military variant would get another update with the M107A1 in 2010, similarly dropping 5 pounds of weight, replacing the Arrowhead muzzle brake with a more traditional one to accommodate the Barret QDL suppressor, adding an improved bolt carrier group, a thermal cheek piece to protect the user in extreme conditions, and magazines given witness holes so the operator can see how many rounds are left. Between all these variants are a number of famous and especially infamous stories surrounding their use around the globe over the last 40 years. More than 60 nations employ the M82 and its variants, including Australia, Brazil, Finland, Italy, Malaysia, Pakistan, Singapore, and Ukraine. But the wide commercial availability of the rifles has brought significant controversy along with immense success. While the coalition forces were beating back Saddam Hussein, the British were taking casualties in Northern Ireland from M82 and M90 equipped IRA snipers as part of the South Armagh sniper campaign. This campaign would last until 1997, leaving 9 combined soldiers and police dead, and the IRA hailing the 50 BMG rifles for their terrifying capabilities. Controversy would flare up in the Barrett's homeland when anti-gun activists began campaigning against the sale of 50 caliber rifles, and specifically the rifles made by Barret, due to claims of the weapon falling into the hands of terrorists, which wasn't entirely untrue, with the aforementioned usage by the IRA and allegations of Al-Qaeda purchasing M82s and sending them to the Middle East. Intertwined with such tales are a number of events from the completely uncontroversial War on Terror. L-82s, the British name for the M82, were on the ground in Afghanistan just 2 months after 9/11, used by the SAS on an operation to destroy Al-Qaeda opium storage facilities in November 2001, where the ability to tear apart cover became essential for the mission's success. The next year, M95-equipped Spanish Marines provided overwatch during the So-San incident, where a freighter from the third most powerful army in Ukraine, North Korea, was stopped and searched by the Spanish and Americans, finding 15 Scud missiles en route to Yemen. But a lack of jurisdiction meant the shipment was released and allowed to continue to its destination. With George W. Bush relaunching his father's crusade against Saddam Hussein, the M82 would again see action in Iraq, with one notable event resulting in Marine Sniper Staff Sergeant Steve Reichert being awarded the Bronze Star for his handling of a Light 50 on April 9, 2004, spending 12 hours picking off insurgents that had ambushed a Marine patrol from an oil tower a kilometer away, with his efforts helping turn the tide for the ambushed Marines. For the US forces in Afghanistan, the M82 would become indispensable for long-range destruction of the IEDs and vehicle-borne bombs that would come to define the conflict in the West's memory. On the other side of the planet, Mexican drug cartels have been acquiring Barrett rifles since the mid-2000s and quite possibly even earlier, infamously using them in high-profile assassinations against Mexican government officials, more so because of the psychological impact an assassination by 50 BMG leaves. The cartels have also employed 50 caliber weapons to damage and destroy government vehicles and helicopters, but it is important to note that the Barrett rifles are not the only 50 caliber firearms in their possession. As the 2010s progressed, the M82 continued to see use in the Middle East, its use in the likes of Operation Dragon Strike in September 2010 again exemplifying the rifle's effectiveness against cover and soft targets. And in 2012, an unnamed Australian would break the formerly British-held longest sniper kill record with an M82A1, hitting a Taliban fighter from 2,815 meters away, a record which would stand for 5 years. In addition, the SAS would continue to employ the M82 against insurgents, taking on Islamic State fighters in Iraq, while a handful of states in the US would ban the sale and manufacture of the M82 after federal efforts largely failed, though statistically the Barrett has rarely been used in criminal activity in the states. That's all to say that, for better or for worse, the Light 50 has been used across the globe for decades, and it has had an undeniable impact on the world. The Barrett M82 Light 50 reinvented the capabilities of sniper rifles in the waning days of the Cold War, carving out a new role in spectacular fashion that persists to this day. Born from the ashes of the anti-tank rifles used in the first half of the century, the M82 combined power and precision into a single package that is capable of rendering nearly any target inert. What began as a photographer's after-hours side project has evolved into one of the most recognizable rifles to emerge in the last 50 years, and an icon of modern militaries around the globe. In the hands of the most rigorously trained marksmen on the planet, or with criminal organizations operating outside of the law, the M82 has gained a remarkable profile that has spawned a new market for anti-materiel rifles, populated by the likes of the American Macmillan TAC-50, the Russian KSVK, the French PGM Hecate II, and the Ukrainian Horizons Lord, which currently holds the record for the longest sniper kill achieved in November 2023 against the invading Russian forces. As for Ronnie Barrett and his company, well, Barrett himself has become a high-profile advocate for gun rights along with sitting on the NRA's board of directors, and his company have continued to innovate, producing new sniper rifles such as the MRAD and M98B, some M4 and M240 derivatives, and even their own caliber, the 416 Barrett, developed by Ron's son, Chris. Given its many applications, the high quality of the rifle, and its legendary status in pop culture, the M82 is likely to remain a staple of military use for many years to come, putting the Barrett in the same class of timeless weapons as the Stoner, the Kalashnikov, and the Browning. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope you've learned something new, and if you want to find out more, the sources I've used are linked below. Sorry it's taken a little longer to get this one out, but I hope it's been worth it, and I want to say thank you for all the kind words you guys have given me while I've been getting this done. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you all in the next one.